Hi kids, today we want to talk about grammar. I really like to write, so I need to have good grammar. Let's begin. Alright kids, let's study simple past. Okay, homework F. Remember, the subject, person, adverb are the same for every question. The subject is Mr. and Mrs. Lee. They. The person is with the men's pal. The pal is a girl, so we say with her. Remember, one man, many men. So the person again, with the men's pal. Adverb, well. So I want you to color the subject, the verb, and the adverb for each question yellow. Those will be the same for every question. Verb, to make, made. Object, a science project. Place, in science lab. Time, the day before last. All right, let's make the question. Remember, when we write a question in simple past, we begin with did. Did Mr. and Mrs. Lee make? Make. Did Mr. and Mrs. Lee make a science project well with the men's pal in science lab the day before last? Yes, they made. That's a simple past. Made. Yes, they made a science project well with her in science lab the day before last. B. No, they didn't make. Didn't tells you simple past. Make. Make. No, they didn't make. No, they didn't make a science project well with her in science lab the day before last. 14. Subject, Mr. and Mrs. Lee. They. Verb, to follow, followed. Object, the rules. Person, with the men's pal, with her. Place, in study hall. Adverb, well. Time, the week before last. Question, did Mr. and Mrs. Lee follow the rules well with the men's pal in study hall the week before last? Answer, yes. They followed the rules well with her in study hall the week before last. No, they didn't follow the rules well with her in study hall the week before last. 15. Subject, Mr. and Mrs. Lee. They. Verb, to buy, bought. Object, lunch. Person, with the men's pal, with her. Place, in the cafeteria. Adverb, well. Time, the month before last. All right, question. Did Mr. and Mrs. Lee buy lunch well with the men's pal in the cafeteria the month before last? Yes, they bought lunch well with her in the cafeteria the month before last. No, they didn't buy lunch well with her in the cafeteria the month before last. 16. Subject, Mr. and Mrs. Lee. They. Verb, to respect, respected. Object, one's classmates. Mr. and Mrs. Lee are two people. They, possessive, their. Object, their classmates. Person, with the men's pal, with her. Place, in PE class. Adverb, well. Time, the year before last. Did Mr. and Mrs. Lee respect their classmates well with the men's pal in PE class the year before last? Yes, they respected their classmates well with her in PE class the year before last. No, they didn't respect their classmates well with her in PE class the year before last. 17. Subject, Mr. and Mrs. Lee. They. Verb, to pass out. Passed out. Object, papers. Person, with the men's pal, with her. Place, in Mandarin class. Adverb, well. Time, last time. Question. Did Mr. and Mrs. Lee pass out papers well with the men's pal in Mandarin class last time? Yes, they passed out papers well with her in Mandarin class last time. No, they didn't pass out papers well with her in Mandarin class last time. 18. Subject, Mr. and Mrs. Lee. They. Verb, to see, saw. Object, the principal. Person, with the men's pal, with her. Place, in the principal's office. Adverb, well. Time, earlier today. Question. Did Mr. and Mrs. Lee see the principal well with the men's pal in the principal's office earlier today? Yes, they saw the principal well with her in the principal's office earlier today. No, they didn't see the principal well with her in the principal's office earlier today. 19. Subject, Mr. and Mrs. Lee. They. verb, to get something from somebody. Got something from somebody. What is that something? That's the object, permission. Person, from the men's pal, from her. Place, in somebody's reading circle. Adverb, well. Time, earlier this week. All right. Mr. and Mrs. Lee are two people. So, somebody's, and here's the pal, her. Mr. and Mrs. Lee, two people, plus the pal. This somebody's is their. Possessive, their. Did Mr. and Mrs. Lee get permission from the men's pal well in their reading circle earlier this week? Yes, they got permission from her well in their reading circle earlier this week. No, they didn't get permission from her well in their reading circle earlier this week. 20. Subject, Mr. and Mrs. Lee. They. Verb, to review. Reviewed. Object, one's notes. Well, Mr. and Mrs. Lee are two people, so that means their notes. Person, with the men's pal, with her. Place, in somebody's study group. Well, Mr. and Mrs. Lee and the pal, that's they, so it's their study group, in their study group. Adverb, well. Time, earlier this month. Did Mr. and Mrs. Lee review their notes well with the men's pal in their study group earlier this month? Yes, they reviewed their notes well with her in their study group earlier this month. Okay, 11. Subject, Mr. and Mrs. Lee. They. Verb, to pay, paid. Object, attention. Person, with the men's pal, with her. Place, in language arts class. Adverb, well. Time, earlier this year. All right. Did Mr. and Mrs. Lee pay attention well with the men's pal in language arts class earlier this year? Yes, they paid attention well with her in language arts class earlier this year. No, they didn't pay attention well with her in language arts class earlier this year. Number 12. Subject, Mr. and Mrs. Lee. They. Verb, to cooperate in. Cooperated in. Object, designing a project. Person, with the men's pal, with her. Place, at somebody's after-school class. Adverb, well. Time, earlier this morning. Remember, this is the PAL and Mr. and Mrs. Lee's after school class, so we use the possessive there. Did Mr. and Mrs. Lee cooperate in designing a project well with the men's PAL at their after-school class earlier this morning? Yes, they cooperated in designing a project well with her at their after-school class earlier this morning. No, they didn't cooperate in designing a project well with her at their after-school class earlier this morning. Okay, kids, thank you for watching this video. Now I need you to do a big favor for me. I want you to like this video, and I want you to leave a comment for me. I want you to write, "Thank you, Mr. Radisha," and then leave your English name. Really appreciate it. Thanks.